Monroe, Brother Monroe here. Welcome to yet another kind of shower thoughts video, very much based, well, not actually based on the previous one that I did for Christmas, where I looked at comparing modern ships to Age of Sail ships using the Napoleonic era Royal Navy rating system, which you should go watch. You don't have to, but I am going to be using that to explain my thoughts in this video. And you might be thinking, what on earth are you talking about? This is a load of rubbish. But yeah, aside from a clickbaity title, yeah, the US Navy is in a lot of trouble. And when I say that, I don't mean the whole US Navy. Their submarines, the carriers, support ships, etc., etc., etc. That all seems in hand, although there are issues. There are always issues around Navy stuff. And I do specifically mean about procurement of surface warfare vessels. A very particular kind of subset of the Navy. It is not the whole of a Navy by any means at all, but it is a very important part, and it's a part that has been neglected. So we're going to go through a little process where we examine the strategic position that the United States Navy finds itself in, what it has, and when we do that, you'll see what I mean, that we have a bit of an issue. And before anyone comes at me, the US Navy is well aware of these issues. I'm not claiming to know more than them. In fact, I think it's pretty clear as we go through that they are well aware of these things and have been for a very long time. So, when you're doing this, you kind of want to go through a thought process. Dr. Alexander Clark, a very good video on this, and why these steps are important and how you should go through this process. But I'm not going to steal his thunder. You can go watch his video. I'll put a link in the description. But we start off by asking ourselves, who is the United States? What is the United States Navy's job? And this is, again, where I was like, they're kind of in a similar position to the British Royal Navy about 200 to 250, 300 years ago. They are a global force. The US has interests all over the globe, literally everywhere. They are the biggest navy, and that means they have the biggest responsibility. There's a lot of stuff that they need to go and do. And what sort of threats are there to the US interests, which are, as I've said, global? So it's not just about defending the United States. That's actually pretty easy to do, geographically speaking. Sure, you've got 2-3 oceans / seas that you need to worry about, but overall it's not too bad. But no, that's not the position the US is in. They have a global trade network. They need global reach. They need global power projection. And what can impact that? Well, so you've got your kind of regular stuff that they're doing all the time. So particularly at the moment, that's things like anti-narcotics work. You might have disaster relief, responding to things like that. Regular peacetime stuff that navies do all the time. Presence patrols, so going out, flying the flag, that kind of thing. Then you have what I would call spicy peacetime threats, which have always been around, but they are a little bit more in people's minds at the moment. So that is where you have a state or a group within a state that is close to something that is, navally speaking, quite important or narrow or a choke point. So examples at the moment would be Houthi rebels in Yemen, with access to not the most high-end things in the world, Shahed drones, or maybe some fairly basic anti-ship missiles. But that is a threat that is a definite step above what a peacetime. That is enemy ordnance coming at you. That is something that you have to worry about. Other examples would be, which the US Navy's been dealing with for a long time, Iran and the Persian Gulf. Somali pirates, potentially, were an issue before. You don't know what's going to happen in the future. Maybe a country around Panama starts deciding to chuck the odd anti-ship missile at things. That could be a big problem. Maybe it's something in North Africa or basically anywhere that can disrupt kind of global trade. It could be something down kind of towards Singapore, potentially attacking shipping, trying to go through the straits there. Any of that kind of stuff I would characterize as kind of spicy peacetime stuff. And then you have the potential of an actual conventional war with another navy. Now, this is where things have changed a little bit from the kind of post-Cold War thinking, where the US found itself basically the only navy in the world and didn't really have to worry about anything because Russian ships were ex-Soviet ships were just rusting away, being completely useless. And if you just kind of pull yourself back and you kind of ignore everything, you go, right, well, what navies are out there? Well, the various European powers, France, Italy, Spain, the UK, we'll throw other similar types of countries. So we've got, Canada, Australia, Japan, South Korea, places like that. They're all mostly allied to the United States. They do have modern navies. They're much smaller, but they do have some good kit. A good kit that could potentially damage your stuff. And you really don't want any of that stuff falling into the enemy column. So that's a potential risk. It's not a big one, but it is something that you do have to think about. So you have to think, well, there are ships out there that are as good as ours. There are missiles out there that potentially can get past our defences. There are ships out there that can potentially shoot down our planes, our missiles. That is a thing. We do not have supreme technological superiority. It is reasonably easy for any developed nation to build a ship that is at least as good as ours. And then we come to the two kind of bigger threats, and that is potentially Russia using its assets to do something. Russia doesn't really have particularly scary surface fleet, but they do have a lot of submarines that are still in decent nick. So you do have to worry about high-end ASW warfare. And China, which doesn't have good submarines, but does have a large and capable surface fleet. Sure, they copy people's homework for a lot of the systems, so they're not quite up to the US's standards, but they're not far off. And they're close enough, and China is obscure enough about what its stuff can actually do that you probably want to err on the side of caution. And of course, that leads us to probably the worst case scenario, which would be a combined China and Russia offensive in the Pacific. That's probably the biggest problem the US Navy would face. So the Pacific is huge, and if Russia combined their submarines with China's surface fleet, then there could potentially be something that the US would go, okay, that's quite significant. So it's not like they're floating around with no threats. Okay, well, let's look at what the US Navy, bless them, have to deal with those threats. So we have a menagerie of various, what I would call, unrated ships. That's ships with no multifunction VLS. In fact, these ships don't even have air defense missiles at all, which is a bit of an issue. And that is the LCS program results, the Freedom and the Independence class. I think some of the Independence class have gotten some naval strike missile box launchers, which is great, and they can, launch helicopters, both of them, which is great. But these are really only suitable for the peacetime stuff that I was talking about. I think even if you were, I would not be comfortable sending an Independence class anywhere near a bunch of Houthi rebels with even something very basic like a Silkworm ASM launcher. That would be a bad time. So they can't do things on their own. They need cover. A very important type of ship, but not really useful for anything other than those kind of low-level, non-spicy peacetime roles. So, okay, we're sort of covered there, assuming those ships are working, kinda. But, anyway, so they're not great. Then we have the Arley Burkes, which carry 96 Mark 41 VLS tubes, which, in my head, makes them a second-rate ship of the line, effectively. So they are big. You can even call them battleships if you want, but they're not. They're called destroyers in the modern terminology. Very good air defense ships. The US is supposed to get about 99 of them between the Flight 1s, Flight 2s, and Flight 3s. That's good. That's a solid battle line. Very solid, I would say. What else? Well, you've got 3 Zomwalts, which, well, okay, they're a bit weird, but if you took all their guns out and put in the new IRCPS cruise missile launchers instead of the guns, which don't work and don't do anything, so you might as well, they become 104-gun first-rate ships, but they don't have the flagship command and control stuff. So they have the firepower of a first-rate, but they don't have all the other stuff that you would kind of expect with a kind of first-rate combatant. So they're really a weird niche. They're kind of effectively, they're building them now as an anti-surface / anti-land strike platform, which is useful, but there's only 3 of them. You don't really want to build your strategy around that. That's not particularly useful against the threats we've been talking about, although maybe they could hit some Chinese ships and be useful in that role. They're not terrible, but yeah, there's only 3, which makes things very, very tricky. And then we have the Constellations, which should have been in a 32-gun, or will be 32-gun 5th rates. Great. That fills out a need that we have, a very big need. But they're only getting 2. Oh dear. That's a bit of a problem, because let's go have a look at what China has. They also have various unrated ships to contend with an LCS or whatever. They actually have a lot more. They have about 60 of the things. They then have kind of 2 sets of 5th rates. They've got the Type 054A and the Type 045B, both of which are 32-gun 5th rates. China doesn't have 2 of them. They have, well, will have very soon, at least 44 of those. Okay. What about bigger ships, destroyers? Well, they've got the Type 052C and Type 051C, which are 48-gun 4th-rate type ships. Not the most impressive things. They only have 8 of those. And they have Type 052D, which is 64 gun, I would say, gun here meaning VLS. So there's small third rates, pretty decent type of ship, maybe a little bit underpowered, especially compared to an Arley Burke, and they have 25. Okay. And they also have the Type 055, which is a first-rate destroyer, with 112 VLS cells. They have 8, and they're planning to build 16. Well, okay, that's not terrible, because we have 100 Arley Burkes, and we can just obliterate them, right? Well, yes and no. So, in an actual shooting war, sure. But China has... If China sends, an 054 somewhere, the US's only response is to send an Arley Burke. An Arley Burke is a lot bigger and can easily win that fight, but it's a lot more expensive to deploy. And unlike the US, China doesn't have to worry about the rest of the world. They really only care about, well, for now, they only really care about their patch, the Pacific. So they could probably send ships to more places than the US can effectively respond to, especially when you throw in their destroyers and stuff. And so that's a bit of a problem. And so when you look at the US, what you see is what I would call a big yawning gap. It's a fur coat with no knickers, if you'll excuse the Britishism. They don't have any fifth rates, really. 2 is not enough to base a fleet strategy around. Because as good as an Arley Burke is, it can only be in one place at one time. And it doesn't matter if it has 96 VLS cells if they're in the wrong blooming place. And sure, the Arley Burke is okay. I would actually argue they're slightly too big and too overstuffed. There's no room in the Arley Burke hull anymore. You can't add anything onto them anymore. They're completely stuffed, and as in full, not broken or anything. But I'm now going to switch gears, and we're going to look at a cautionary tale. Because the Arley Burkes are old. They're a Cold War era design. And we don't have to look very far, or I don't anyway, to find another navy that was relying on Cold War era designs to fulfill a large part of its kind of mission. And that is the Royal Navy and the Type 23 frigate, a ship that I really like. I even made a kit bash of it for Sea Power. I'm currently waiting on getting a custom model for it. They're great ships. Really good ASW frigate, which is exactly what the Royal Navy needs. They've taken on a lot of other duties over the years for other reasons, which is also something that the Arley Burkes have suffered with, because the Type 23s are often the only viable warship the Royal Navy has at any one time. And they're worn out. They're really old. They are rotting in some cases. You might ask yourself, how does a ship made of steel rot? But the Royal Navy has found a way, because the sea eventually makes your ship rust and break. And generally, the engines wear out, parts become hard to place, because you're not building any more of these ships. There's no continual production line. Once you stop building them, well, then they have a shelf life, and eventually they'll run out. And it's actually starting to really affect Royal Navy, the Royal Navy's ability to do things. So if you have a Russian ship going through the Channel, well, now we can't always have a Type 23, follow it around. Now we often have to send a River class or an RFA ship or a random minesweeper or something. Whereas really you would want a Type 23 to do it. And the Royal Navy knows this about the Type 23 and has known for a long time, and we're building replacements which should be ready soon, but not soon enough. Things are going to get pretty hairy in the next few years for the Royal Navy, because the Type 23s basically about to break, and none of them can remain in service much longer. There recently was one that was forward deployed with the carrier group, and they got back to Bahrain, and then they were like, oh no, we need to recertify this thing for legal reasons to get it home, and wow, that's an expensive bill. No, let's just scrap it here. Let's not even bother trying to bring it back. Let's just write it off. Wow. That's not a thing that the Royal Navy is wanting to have to do. That is bad. And the rest of the Type 23 fleet is in similarly dire straits. And this is the fate that awaits the Arley Burkes. They're a similar vintage. The Flight 1s are going to start getting a bit decrepit and a bit broken. Now, the US Navy is not stupid. They can do all of this reasoning themselves, no problem. They are smart cookies. And they knew this problem was coming up in 2017. They realised, we don't always need an Arley Burke to go and do things. To do spicy peacetime things, even to do some wartime things, especially ASW work, which an Arley Burke is far too large and noisy and a big target for. We'll start a project to create a frigate. That's what eventually led to the Constellations. And yes, they're starting to run out. So they did this. 2017? I think the Constellation project started, or what became Constellation. And they also realised and started in 2021. Well, we should probably start looking at a replacement for the Arley Burkes. And great. Maybe a little late, but, it takes about 10 years from going, hey, let's build a ship, to getting the ships out in the water. So 2017 plus 10, 2027. So next year, yes, 2017 was 9 years ago. We'll have our new ships starting to come out, and another 10 years on top of that, we'll probably have finished the class of 20 or 30 or so, and we'll be able to relieve the pressure on the Flight 1 Arley Burkes and the Arley Burkes in general. They won't wear out as fast. That's great. And then 2031, 2032, we'll have new destroyers coming out that can start to replace the Flight 2s as they start to wear out. Great. One problem, both of those programs are dead. Completely dead. So the Constellations, of course, were cancelled just before Christmas and are being replaced by the Legend class cutter, or a version of the Legend class cutter. It might have some 8 or maybe even more naval strike missiles. No VLS, no missile defense. No long/medium range missile defense. No ability to protect themselves for spicy peacetime conditions, which is what the Navy actually needs. They've already got ships that can do the peacetime stuff. Okay, they're not very good, and the Legend class will be much better than a Freedom or an Independence class because it can act. It's a blue water ship, so they're not a bad ship to be building, but they aren't solving that kind of nothing in the middle problem that the US Navy has. And then we got, well, let's not bother building more an Arley Burke successor. Let's build something totally insane. Now, quote unquote battleships. I actually do think they're battleships because they're fulfilling that first-rate role, but that's not what we would call them in the modern day. We would call them a cruiser. But even if you cut them down to a much more sensible size with weapons that exist and, things like this, and you look at it and you go, well, sure, a command cruiser, That's a pretty useful asset. Probably one that the US Navy needs. It's one that the US Navy has been trying to build for decades. This is the Long Beach type approach. Strike cruiser, CGX, all these things. They wanted a big cruiser-style command surface warship for decades, and they've never gotten funded. So they went, let's stick a bunch of nonsense on it and call it a battleship, and hooray. But that's not what the Navy needs anymore, because they don't have the workhorse ships. They don't have those fifth rates. They don't have third rates, which I would argue would be a better kind of size to pitch for replacement for the Arley Burkes. They don't have those kind of backbones of the fleet. And their plan to fix that is to build more fur coats and replace the stuff that can do peacetime stuff that didn't work. And that's it. And the problem with naval procurement is it's going to take time to course correct. And, well, it'll take you 10 years. How long are these two programs going to last? Probably until about 2029, 2030 is the next time anyone's going to be able to look at this again and go, probably not. And then you're talking another 10 years to actually get any ships in the water, which leads you to 2040 before you're seeing any new ships. Look at China and their navy in 2016, when the US Navy was like, we have a problem, because we have someone who's not our ally building modern warships that have enough stuff, enough capabilities, that they can cause us an issue. They send one of their frigates over to some island that we're disputing in the South China Sea. We have to send an Arley Burke. Okay. And you might be saying, well, there's loads of other things the US could send. They could just blow the ship up with their enormous air force. Hell, you send a B-52 loaded up with anti-ship missiles. It'll delete anything. But in certainly non-war scenarios, surface ships are really your best option, because people can see them. It's very hard to see a plane. It's very hard to see a submarine. That's kind of the point. Surface ships, though. Surface ship can show up in port, show up on the news, flying the flag, shadowing an enemy ship. You see that a lot lately in the UK, where a Russian ship, well, to make people feel safe, what the Navy will do is they will release pictures. There was a great one where a submarine surfaced right next to this Russian ship. No, look, we're looking after you. We're protecting your interests. And that goes for your home population and your allies. You've got a US ally somewhere, China's bullying them. Well, we'll send a ship. Well, you're going to have to send an Arley Burke, because there aren't any others. You're not going to be sending a Zumwalt. They're all in dry dock getting their stuff fixed. You're not going to send an LCS, because it's pathetic. And you don't want to look pathetic next to your enemy. You want to, at the very least, equal. So yeah, I think the US Navy is in a big old hole, and they know it. I don't know what the reaction was to the cancellation of the Constellations, which is a tongue twister to say. But I bet it wasn't good, because sure, the Navy lied. I'm pretty sure they lied when they said, "Oh yeah, we'll take a European design and we'll build them quickly and cheaply, because building our own frigate, well, you've told us that's too expensive, so they used it as an excuse to just build their own frigate anyway. The constellations are very different from the Italian Bogano Frems that they were based on. Yeah, they're not... There are other things the US Navy could have picked if they wanted a frigate with American weapons and sensors. Although they weren't necessarily in the competition. There was the F-100 based design from Spain, which probably would have been fine. But then they wouldn't have the excuse, well, we need to tinker with it, we need to put US stuff in it, and they wouldn't get to design their own frigate anyway. So that's why I'm pretty sure, I'm guessing, but I'm pretty sure that's what happened. Right, we want to build our own frigate. We can't say we want to build our own frigate. Let's get an Italian frigate, which obviously comes with European weapons and sensors. Well, we've got to put US weapons and sensors on it. Well, we have to operate in the Pacific, not the Mediterranean, so we need to make them bigger. And then you are, by stealth, designing a frigate that you want. So the Constellations are, I would say, very good ships. They are scratch-built, US-designed frigates that now they're not going to get to have enough of to do anything with. If you only get 2, that's crap. And they're instead getting glorified Coast Guard cutters. Ooh. If I was surface warfare US Navy, I would be livid right now. And sure, yeah, battleships, whatever, cool, but they're not going to happen. Surely not. The price of them alone, and this is without cost overruns. This is without the systems and all the rest of it that don't exist having to be developed. And, oh, yeah, that railgun project that we canned and we don't have anymore, and you want it to do insanely high energies, okay, and lasers that, again, we kind of have, but they're a lot less powerful than the ones you're talking about. And how do we power this thing? And yeah, so many issues with that. But I'm assuming that it's either going to get canned or redone so that it is something completely different. But more likely, it just gets canned. And that's it. Oh dear. Yes, so the United States Navy, I would say, is in a big pile of poo, and the plan they had to dig themselves out of it has been blown up, possibly at the worst time it could be, and replaced by more of the same thinking that got them into this mess in the first place. Because the Arley Burkes were obviously replacements for the various Cold War era destroyers that the US Navy had. But I think they made them too big. I think they're slightly too big. So they were like, we can make them replace the Ticonderoga class cruisers as well, which were also up-gunned destroyer hulls. And so what they've done is they've come up with a very successful design that has led them down a garden path of disaster. It is bad. It is bad. And I'm not sure the US Navy is doing the right things right now. But what could they do in 2029, 2030 to try and fix this? And that will be the subject of the next video, which you can look forward to. Thank you very much for watching. I've done this somehow in a single take, so like, subscribe. I'm not sure how many of these types of videos I will be doing, but return to normal once I feel up to it, and I hope you've enjoyed. Bye for now.